de este jueves 7 de octubre y seguimos con la mesa número 23. En esta oportunidad la modalidad es en el idioma inglés. Vamos a hablar sobre la topología de la Tierra, el tema de geopolítica climática, y para ello tenemos una invitada especial. Por favor, síganos para nuestras redes Facebook y YouTube y utilice sus botones de traductor al idioma español. Welcome once again to the international section of this academic congress worldwide, the second triple historical encounter of environmental law, where FIDA, the Forum International of Environmental Law, EIDA, the Encounter International of Environmental Law, and COPLADA, the Planetarium Congress of International Law, is here spreading the word, the voice, the vote of what we are doing here, is sharing the wisdom to you, to the audience that are watching. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for trusting us. Do not go away. We have right now a great table. This table topic is Earthology, Geopolitics, the climate of geopolitics. And for this, we have a special guest speaker. Susanna Hancock is with us. Hi, Susanna, how are you?
Hello, Carrie, I'm well, thank you.
Thank you for being here with us.
I'm very excited. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to wrap up or get towards the end of the second day of the Congress.
Right? Yes, I am so excited for your presentation. I mean, let me first introduce you to the audience so they know who you are, okay? Just give me a second.
Yes.
Susanna Hancock, PhD, began her academic career as a 14-year-old astrophysicist at the University of Southern Maine, and now is a multidisciplinary researcher engaged in Arctic climate geopolitics and environmental anthropology. Recently, she has been working on several reports for the IPCC. We all know who is the IPCC, right? Code Red, Alert Humanity, okay. Chairing a team with the UN's Ocean Decade and now leading a new team looking at the social geopolitical impact of climate change. She routinely writes policy papers and articles on a variety of subjects related to Arctic climate and is currently working on a book on the impact of research on the climate crisis. She's on the executive committee of the Association for Polar Early Career Scientists and works to engage emerging scholars in questions of diplomacy and climate through all the polar regions. Trained in both natural and social sciences and with extensive nonprofits and political experience throughout the world, Susanna works to have a global impact on environmental policy and the climate crisis through multi-sector collaboration. You're amazing, Susanna. I always tell you something. I give God a blessing for your life. Thank you so much for all you do.
Well, thank you for having this platform where we can all get together and talk and hear each other. So thank you.
And to share the awareness and the education of what we need, right? Because we learn from you. I'm learning from you right now. So just to get into the subject, if in our subject, what is geopolitics concept?
So geopolitics is the idea, really simply, that political relations are informed by geography. So what does that mean? And I'll get into this, but it's basically looking at the role of, say, oceans or waterways, land masses, mountain chains, for example. How do those impact political power? Positioning one's geographical position within certain areas, does it offer benefits? Does it give access to certain parts of the world, to other political strategies, to allies? So think about, for example, a chessboard with all the possible different moves from all the different figures. And how do the land masses and the rivers, the mountain ranges, the ice, how do those inform the available moves that one can play on the chessboard? That makes sense a little bit of what it is, yes. But it's international relations mixed with geography.
Okay, so like the study of the earth mixed with humanity, you can say, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and what are examples of geopolitics?
So there are several examples, and I'd love to show a couple images of this, if that's all right with you.
Yes, please share your screen. I am so excited for your presentation.
All right. So true in a moment. All right. So this is my little chessboard image here. And so I'll start with this, and then I'll talk a little bit about why
the
world is interesting to me, especially geopolitics. So this is an image of Iceland and one example of this geopolitics. So Iceland had a series with the UK of what are known as Cod Wars in the middle of the 20th century. And what these were basically British ships fishing in Icelandic waters. This had been something that had been going on since the 14th century, and Britain really relied on waters around Iceland to provide sufficient fish for its population. And in the 19th century, so the 1800s, the demand for seafood really rose in Britain. And so the British started fishing more extensively in these Icelandic waters. So by 1951, Iceland sought to expand its exclusive zone, which meant that the area where only Icelanders or vessels registered in Iceland were eligible to fish. And in 1958, there were several countries that said, let's actually extend this it was 4 nautical miles, and let's extend it to 12 nautical miles. So this is the light blue area around Iceland. And so they opted to extend it to 12 nautical miles. And they took that to the UN, and the UN said no. So Iceland by itself said, okay, well, we're not going to do this as a group. We're going to do this as our own country. So it started saying nobody else is allowed to fish within 12 nautical miles of our territory. So Britain said, well, we need to fish. And this was a unilateral decision, not acceptable. So Britain continued to fish within Iceland's waters. They accompanied their fishing vessels with the Royal Navy, and they were prepared basically to defend against any Icelander onslaught. So Iceland at the time was looking for protection, and it never has had a navy of its own. So it argued that if it doesn't get protection and it doesn't maintain its exclusive fishing rights, it would withdraw from the NATO alliance. So other countries were interested in keeping Iceland as part of NATO because it fits the strategic place in the world between Greenland, Scandinavia, and Britain, that it gives NATO countries this region of access. So if Iceland weren't part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, then other countries would lose that access to that waterway. So, and this was during the Cold War, a big submarine choke point, which is why the Icelandic region was so important. So ultimately, NATO ended up brokering a peace deal between Iceland and the UK that enabled Iceland, that formalized Iceland's request for only Icelandic vessels fishing in its 12 nautical mile territory.
So nobody helped Iceland? I'm sorry, nobody helped Iceland?
So NATO did.
NATO did. Okay.
Yes, they did. But it was a war that, not a super aggressive, war, but I think there were a few bullets fired. And ultimately,
yes, Britain is an empire. It's a huge empire.
Exactly. Yeah. They had the navy in Iceland, and but Iceland was able to win each one mainly because it had the support and it had its fisheries. But when NATO came and it brokered this deal, because of the need for Iceland, because they needed that geography, because it was so strategic for the Cold War, they ended up sided with Iceland and said, we need our 12 nautical miles. That Britain then said, okay, well, if you're doing it, we're doing it. So Britain then adopted their own rules for 12 nautical miles. And ultimately it led to a 200 nautical mile, what's known as exclusive economic zone, which is something that became part of the UN Convention of Law of the Sea. And became signed into treaties around the world. So this is that dark blue region. And this means that while Icelandic vessels can fish within the lighter blues, the dark blue requires Iceland's permission for a vessel to fish in the region. So Britain can still fish in that region, but it needs permission to do so. So this is an example in which, you know, Britain wanted to fish in this region, it wanted the resources, and Iceland wanted to keep those resources for itself. And then other countries had an interest in this conflict because they wanted to maintain basically on ice, they wanted to stay on Iceland's good side so they could keep that region of the world accessible during the Cold War. So that's sort of one example. But, you know, we look around the world, we have a similar choke point with the Russian North Arctic fleet, their ocean vessels trying to come over Norway, which again, a similar region. Norway is being a NATO country, similar, you know, chokehold there. Looking at Brexit in the UK, you know, the UK is an island, and it has a lot of ways of separating itself. Looking at Prime Minister Modi in India and the abrogation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, and his efforts to revoke citizenship and to make India really a non-Muslim state. So, you know, taking advantage of this region in which it's been argued over between India and China and Pakistan. So, you know, these are all over the world.
Right. And how does climate change affect geopolitics?
So one example is, I mean, I'm particularly interested in the Arctic. So I have this little diagram that will show a little bit of what's going on.
Please.
So this just shows the melting extent of the ice. And it will go.
The ice is all the blue, right? Or the what do we look? That's the ice?
Yeah, that's the ice. So we're looking at, so here you can see that most of the ice is, it's gonna just run and repeat, but you can see where it's, you know, thinning. And so what is really interesting or important to see here is that the Arctic is opening up. And we've had regions that have been kept apart by ice, and they are no longer kept apart. We have borders opening, basically. So this is an image looking down on the Arctic. So we have Canada and the United States on the left, and Russia on the right, and European Arctic in the south. Or sorry, on the bottom of the image. And so there's the dotted line surrounding it, which is the Arctic Circle. And this shows a bunch of things here. The areas that are painted in with that sort of taupe color are areas of oil exploration. Down looking in Russia, Northern Europe, we see these green lines. These are pipelines, oil and gas. And again, we see those over in the US and Canada. And what I guess the images, the piece in the center, or that has these colors here, this shows areas in which the national regions come together. So we have this part that Russia, which is Russia's exclusive area, Russia, US, Canada, Denmark, and Norway. And these 5 states are known as the littoral Arctic states, the littoral 5, because littoral being ocean based.
They have concessions there in the same Arctic areas, or they have.
Sorry, repeat the question.
They have pieces of the Arctic as the colors you mentioned there. You know, in the bottom of the photograph, it says Russia, Canada, yes, Denmark, USA, Asgard, and named. So they have pieces of the concession of this earth.
Yeah. So Russia, for example, has claimed this section of the Arctic as basically its own, and the US and Canada, Denmark.
Okay, so they exploit different areas.
Yes. So they put claims out for some area, but then you get into questions: can somebody actually own part of the ocean, for example? or a country that has particular interest in one region. So I guess I just want to start with this image. There's a lot going on, a lot of different interests. And what else you'll see, and these are shipping routes. And some of these are in increased access now. As the ice melts, they become open and they become available. And so I want to talk about that in a moment because shipping is one of those big topics right now. But just to give a little bit of background, this is an area in which I've lived. So the bottom two images or bottom two suns that I put on are places that I've actually lived, one in eastern Iceland and one in northern Norway. And then the northern one in northwestern Alaska is not a place I've actually lived, but a place I've spent quite a bit of time. So yeah, it's interesting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about shipping.
Yes.
As you mentioned, the previous image had some shipping lines. So shipping is one of those topics that's probably the hot topic in the Arctic right now about geopolitics. Is that we just look at these two images. We've got the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route. And there's lots of shipping from these, well, Rotterdam being a central spot in Europe and San Francisco and Yokohama in the US and Japan. You can see that if we pick this image of the Northern Sea Route, which is the one on the right, ships that go from Yokohama to Rotterdam need to go through the Suez Canal. And I'm sure we all remember the ship Evergreen that got stuck in the Suez Canal for several days last spring. And yeah, that's a big block, not just when ships obviously get stuck in it, but you know, that it takes quite a long time to get through the canal. There's concerns over piracy and the maximum ship size. So these are the same concerns we have on the Northwest Passage on the left as well, with the Panama Canal. So
how do you know how many like months or do they get there to get told the route?
How many months?
Yeah, in the shipping, how do they get there? Like how many time?
Oh, so it can take about a month. It can take about 1 month to get from Yokohama to Rotterdam, going on what's marked here as the current route through the Suez Canal and through the Mediterranean Sea. Okay. So the idea is that if the ice is melting, they could go across the Arctic, and that can shave approximately maybe 2 weeks off of the time of the transport. So it could cut it in half, which you could look at and say, well, if you cut it in half, you're saving a lot of fuel, you're saving a lot of expenses. Or you can double your trips because with the same amount of expenses and the same amount of fuel, etc. So, but there are a lot of risks for it. You know, you certainly don't have the canals to go through, and there aren't concerns over piracy. So in some ways, those are good. But there are concerns over ice. So if one gets stuck, for example, in ice, then you can easily sit and wait for the ice to melt, maybe make the trip much slower. There are also the navigation. There are places that we don't have boats. So if there's navigation issues, if there's an issue with the ship, it's really hard to get attention. If there is a spill, an oil spill, it's really disastrous because there isn't anybody available to clean it up. But also, the colder water means that the oil doesn't really dissipate. It doesn't disintegrate as much as oil. Oil doesn't disintegrate well anyway, but it can.
May I ask you something? Maybe you don't have a percentage, or maybe you do. What is the amount of shipping that has like oil, like in the ocean, just spread? Like it's a large amount, or it's not so common because of the journey? Like 1 month is a lot of time, so they have to refuel their ship. They have to change, everything on engines or everything. So the oil there gets there, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much, except some of the ships definitely do set out with a full, with all of the fuel that we need for their trip, especially going through the Arctic where they're not going to be able to refill.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is sort of a catch-22. It might save time, but it also environmentally disastrous if something goes wrong, and
Right.
safe for people as well. So the northern sea route is one that, because the ice is melting more, it has really opened up. The Northwest Passage north of Canada has not really opened up yet. There's a US icebreaker that has been going through over the past month, and a couple ships that occasionally get through, but usually that's a much more hazardous route and not really that open. But these pose other issues, because now, for example, a ship from Yokohama to Rotterdam going to Russia and Siberia is now effectively in Russian waters. And going back to talking about Iceland and 200 nautical miles, now you're in Russian waters. Are those international waters? Are those Russian waters? Can Canada say the Northwest Passage is waters? And so Russia now accompanies these ships.
And not also that. I mean, every single route that the shipping has to get to the destination has different environmental policies. Like, they're not the same. So if they go like from one route to the other one, and they just like go by the sea in different territories, in different jurisdiction of environmental policies, they have to like get there with whatever they say, I mean, it's very important to know that they are like frontiering all the countries, right? They go straight. They just go like a tour, like with a different jurisdiction, different environmental laws, different environmental policies there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Some countries, and we don't have this throughout the entire Arctic yet, but it is in certain parts in the sort of Russia, Norway, Svalbard region, where they have limits on emissions. And so either they need to have called scrubbers, which remove the sulfur from the fuel. They need to use certain types of fuel, or they need to control their speed. They're much slower, so their emissions are lower. So there are a lot of things like that that vary across the journey. So, as much as one tries to be uniform, if you set out and go directly, there are different environmental legislations that people need to follow, that the ships need to follow. Exactly. This is an image of a Russian nuclear icebreaker in the ship closest to us.
Wow.
It is accompanying this other vessel through the Northern Sea route. And so Russia typically provides the service where it ensures ships get through, but it charges for them. So, Russia's making money off of other countries going through its northern waters. So that's another question. Is it right for Russia to be making money? Is it right for them to be charging? And then it looks at who is coming through. China, for example, is very, very interested in the Northern Sea route, and China has now taken interest in the Arctic, and argued itself as an Arctic state, even though China's not really near the Arctic. Singapore and Bangladesh have both applied to be observer states to the council. They're 1 degree. Singapore is at 1 degree off of the equator, and it's claiming that it wants to be an Arctic state, and that's because it has interest in what's going on in the Arctic.
And who takes these decisions? Like United Nations, NATO, like each country. I mean, who does the right to Russia to charge this, and who does the right to Russia to not do anything about this disaster or catastrophe in what their jurisdiction is? I mean, who?
Yeah, I don't know in full, except it is discussed. I mean, there are the UN has several legislations about it.
Okay.
There's the International Maritime Organization, which the IMO, which meets several times a year to discuss some of these current issues. They would handle some of the legislation, but the legislation in shipping is done by state. So there is no real organization overall that can impose any kind of environmental policy, for example, on ships around the world.
So this is like geopolitical impacts here. Like this is geopolitics, like impacts here, right? Like how does this impact in the geopolitics and with obviously the environmental laws that we are fighting for?
Uh, sorry, I didn't quite catch that question.
Yes, what are the impacts of this geopolitics that we can see here with this disaster in the environment? What do we do about it?
So, I mean, some of the impacts are, if there is an oil spill in the Arctic, who's responsible? Who cleans it up? And
Yes.
one of those that it's not just going to impact, if this happens north of Russia, it's not just going to impact Russia. It's going to impact people all over the place. It's going to impact ecosystems, indigenous populations who live on the coast and rely on marine mammals for fishing, for example. We're already seeing in Greenland, just working on a paper about the Inuit hunting whales and walruses, seals, and the amount of toxins and mercury and PCBs that are in that meat. And almost everybody there exceeds the recommended capacity humans or tolerance for such toxins. But it's in their culture to eat these. And they haven't put those toxins in. Those toxins have come from people elsewhere in the world that have made it up into these northern waters. And so they have a choice of eating food that's really ingrained into their culture. It's eventually going to be making them sick, or changing their culture and eating something else. And that gets into another issue in Greenland because it's under the Danish crown, and Denmark controls a lot of what foods are available, and gets into new costs and all sorts of things. So that it's the people and the communities and the ecosystems that we're impacting. It's not just that the vessel is going to have a leak and only that vessel or only the person who is responsible for fixing that leak or have some issue is the people who are going to be impacted. I mean, we see that with Greenland melting, and it's melting at a rate of about 6 Olympic swimming pools of water per second. And that's sea level rise, but it's not necessarily affecting people immediately in Greenland. It is, but not as drastically as it's affecting people in low-lying islands in the South Pacific, for whom this is, Fiji purchased land to move the entire country. Sorry, Kiribati purchased land in Fiji to move the entire country several years ago because it was concerned that it wouldn't be able to stay there. And that's from sea level rise that it's not causing. So it's, what goes on in one place doesn't just stay there. It affects everywhere.
This type of image that you're seeing here with this disaster in the environment, it doesn't affect that area. It affects everything around it, right? Because this is the Arctic, right?
Yes.
So the picture that you showed us before, this is in the middle of the countries, like around them, So yeah. Whatever happens here, it affects the sea, under the sea, everywhere. Yeah. Tornadoes, tsunamis, like everything will be altered because of this disaster in the shipping that we are seeing here in environmental crises that we have. And the impact is so huge that we cannot even imagine how this impact in the sea, under the sea, because we can see the iceberg on the top, but we don't see under the iceberg, we don't see the huge problem that we have under the sea. And this reminds me, is there any geopolitical solutions for this?
Well, so in the past, some of the solutions have been a little bit challenging because they've said, well, the United States, for example, is responsible for most of the cumulative pollution in the world. And so maybe the US should pay for that. And so this is some of the basis of the Montreal and Kyoto protocols, to make those historical emitters pay. And that didn't succeed. Countries didn't want to take on more burden because they had the capacity to do something because they were a previous emitter. So how we have the Paris Accords, and how the Paris Agreement works is it puts a little bit more burden on countries to respond with focusing more on the current emission. And so countries are then responsible for more of an equal share, which means that they're responsible for most countries for emissions that they didn't cause. But there are also ways of, there's a climate fund and other sources of providing funding for countries that need the funds for doing it. I think, so it's all solutions will become very political very quickly. But communication is very key. And knowing what state is doing what state is doing what. And we're seeing, the Arctic has been an area in recent decades of relative peace and relative calm. But, go back into the Cold War and it was an system as well. And so there continue to be simmering tensions that have the capacity to escalate, but so far seem to be pretty calm. But I think one thing with the ice melting is that there are new borders and new countries coming together. I mean, this is just an image here of, Russia and China. Suddenly, they've always been neighbors, but suddenly they're now neighbors in the Arctic, and that's never happened before. So those alliances change, and as the ice melts and new areas open up.
Right, and all these geopolitics impacts and problems and crises, one of the main events that they need to communicate is when it's like the COP26 or the United Nations, events, that they can speak up and they can just like interconnect ideas and create ideas for the better and not for the worse. And so what do you think this can be the challenges of geopolitics?
Conflict and resources, I think, are areas that are getting a lot of attention to that. And we're seeing countries mining more resources, but we're also seeing areas where there's not enough food and there's not enough water, and sometimes there is, but it's being diverted or it's choosing who's getting access. So, it's concerns over alliance. This image of China and Russia. Russia has declared China its strategic partners for Arctic relations. And China is not one of the 8 Arctic states, but it wants to be. And so Russia has brought in China at the expense, at the risk of alienating countries like Norway and Finland and the United States and the other Arctic countries. So those tensions put a little bit more pressure on not just Russia's relations with other Arctic states, but China's relations with those states as well. And I think other challenges are, not harming anybody. I mean, looking at Kiribati, looking at relocating the entire country just because of its recipients of it's being, receiving climate impacts that it didn't directly cause. So I think those are sort of some of the big challenges. But again, we're seeing this around the world. It's not just in the Arctic. We're seeing it in the Sahel in Africa, where herders and farmers are fighting over the same water and the same land for crops and for animals. And, that's becoming into a big, in places, civil war. We're seeing this in Afghanistan, where with the resurgence of the Taliban, farmers who are not able to get a farm.
I think that is a great example, Afghanistan, with all the troubles and all the tribulation that is going on right now in Afghanistan. And I was wondering, while you were talking about it, I was wondering, what is the problem that they cannot get to communicate in a way that they can solve the crisis that they have, right? What is the problem they cannot sit down and just talk about what is beneficial for everybody, not just for their country or Russia or China or Denmark or wherever they have around. And I am telling you this why. The picture that you showed us, that the Arctic was in the middle of all the countries around it right here, the Arctic is in the middle. And if you can see, all the countries are around it, and they are fighting for something that if the ice melts and everything, that the environmental crisis gets to the point of 1.5 global warming or more, nobody can communicate because we will be very, very bad. So, I mean, they cannot get to communicate in a way that they can solve this picture, that they can see that they need each other. They're not alone. It's not that Russia is like 4,000 million miles from the Arctic, and United States is like another 10 million miles. They're together, and you can see they're so near. And in the shipping is 1 month. It's nothing. I mean, it's not like 3 years. I mean, it's all very near. So it's so amazing that they cannot get to that negotiation about the common wealth of everybody and the common benefits for everybody. Although they are experts in geopolitics, I believe that they're experts in that, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you're also saying when this ice is melting, we're now having, Russia and the United States are now sharing this northern border that they've never shared before. I mean, they've shared the Bering Sea. So in the upper part of this picture, the Chukchi Sea up in here, yeah, sure, they've been together there. But the idea that there's no ice, that's new. Or, I mean, it's been known about for quite a while, but it's becoming this reality. So we do have those increased new borders, which are changing the tensions. But there's also a disagreement necessarily in what's good for people. I mean, you're talking about let's come together for the common good. What is that common good? And we have different countries with different ideas. And, one example is deep sea mining. The EU, the European Union, has put a moratorium on deep sea mining because it is argued that is environmentally disastrous. Norway, not part of the EU, is actually actively trying to support deep sea mining because it believes that deep sea mining is about 30% cleaner than the mining that they're doing on land. So both of these positions are saying they're doing this for the common good. They're doing this because it is a cleaner, more ethically healthier way to get these minerals that we want, either on land or in the sea. But they don't agree on what's the correct way, even though they both think that what they're doing is correct and what they're doing is correct for the world and environmentally responsible as well. So we have these, conflicts over who's right and who's not. And it's not always as clear cut as one is correct. And, with the looking forward with the environmental crisis, I mean, wanting a transition to cleaner fuels, at the moment, we're relying on mining for that. So if we're going to be mining, how best do we do it? Where do we do it? And we look at a lot of parts of the world where mining is really developing child labor because we need people to go into those mines, and we need to get our lithium and our cobalt and our manganese. And how are we getting those? We're getting them by sending young children there, but we're doing it in the name of solving the climate crisis. So, there's a lot of challenges.
Yes, yes, there is. And I really believe that we have hope. It's when I was listening to you, I was thinking about the climate change deniers. They seem to be like these climate change deniers that they don't see facts, but the facts are there and they don't want to see them, and they're blind for the facts, and you cannot change facts. Facts are truth, So they are doing things by being blind by a lot of interest, and we know that. But the thing is that there's no time anymore for that, like the nature and all the environmental policies that this academic congress is about, taking the awareness and letting us know and learn that we have to take action, not just speak, just get educated or get aware of what is going on, but take action and take these environmental policies of environmental law where they have to be. So this is like incredible to understand that they are gathered in United Nations or like the next gas flow in COP26, and they are still going to talk, And what are the geopolitics of climate change in the post-pandemic scenario?
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned Glasgow and COP26. I'm headed there in a couple of weeks, so I'm quite excited for it. But, this was a conference that was supposed to take place last year. And I know you and I have spoken about the IPCC and the Code Red report that came out in August. There were supposed to be two other reports that came out as well, looking at mitigations and adaptations. And those now aren't getting released until February and March. So this conference where we have everybody together in Glasgow, we don't have that material to discuss. And ultimately, these reports are synthesized reports, which means that there's no new material. They're not necessarily telling us anything that we don't already know, but they provide that oomph and that building block for these international negotiations. So to hold COP without this and with only the first working group's report out is a little bit unfortunate. And again, this was a conference that was supposed to be held last year, so we are a little bit in some ways behind. But meetings have continued, and so that. But there's also been the focus on the economy, getting the economy back up and running, and that priority that doesn't always run in alignment with addressing the climate crisis. So that's tough. That's tough to see. And I think another area that's really highlighted in getting back to, COP was saying that everybody there needs to be vaccinated. And I have acquaintances in the United States who are 30 years old and getting their third booster shot of Pfizer Moderna. And then you look at a whole entire continent like Africa, where fewer than 2% of the population has been vaccinated at all. And so these injustices about the haves and the have-nots are really being divided by this pandemic. It's, these lines that have already been there are getting reinforced. And these are the same lines that climate hits really as well, looking at those indigenous populations, and that's, I guess, having lived there in Norway with an indigenous group for several years, that's an area that to me is really, really pertinent. But seeing these divisions and how the pandemic has reinforced them and caused further divides, and they're the same divides, as I said, that climate causes. So those injustices, lack of access to vaccines, to technology, to having a voice, a lot of mining that's done in indigenous areas because countries feel that they can tell people what to do. And so, who's benefiting and who's getting hurt. And I think those need to become increasingly relevant, not increasingly relevant, increasingly prominent discussions. And I think that COVID has provided more of a platform to highlight some of these issues.
Yes, we had a table before about the indigenous community, and I was shocked to know that the 5% of the population are indigenous community, but they protect the 70% of the earth that is not yet so damaged.
Exactly.
And they don't have a committee there. They don't have a committee like, I don't know, a NATO for communities of indigenous people, or a United Nations for that. And in Glasgow, COP26, I don't know if they're going to be making strategies about this geopolitics of climate and environmental crisis, that we are seeing the facts, that we see that what is going on, and we are seeing that they need to take action and not just think about the economic post-pandemic, how the countries are going to again recover from the economic crisis that they are having, that we all are having, because in every single country of the planet, this pandemic give a very low economic income to a lot of people. So that is not the issue. The issue is what happens if the Arctic melts? What happens if we are going to go to global warming about 1.5 or 2, there's not money for that. So I mean, they need to understand that this has to be taken in action right now for environmental policies to be legislated and executed, and for the most vulnerable, Like, yeah, that's it, climate justice. I am shocked to know that like 2% in Africa are not vaccinated and they are not allowed to, or they're just marginated by that, you know. And in another countries, developed countries, not the underdeveloped ones, they are the third shot or fourth shot or whatever. So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, since I was born, I can hear this. I mean, and I am an adult right now, and I am hearing the same thing, and I am repeating what my ancestors told me, and that is sad. It's so sad, right?
Yep.
But it's true, and this is why indigenous rights and climate justice has a match as equal, because they need to be heard and need to have voices and need to be taken care of. I mean, there's so much ignorance in humanity with a lot of things, and we're still getting a lot of technology and a lot of material things around us, but we are still ignorance in our hearts. We are still ignorance in the common benefits for everybody, and cannot judge anybody. You know, I always say the same thing, and you know me, Susana. God is the only judge. We are not judges, and the one that thinks that is a judge, he's gonna be judged like the same way. So this indigenous right that we are having here, that we are voting and voicing and volume up for climate justice, I think is one of the strategies that we have for geopolitics to be spoken in volume, our voice, right?
Exactly. And, you know, at the same time, we have talk about indigenous rights and indigenous nations, and these people are not going to be part of the plenary sessions at COP. You know, those are going to be the heads of state and states, you know, Fiji and the United States and Canada. You know, it's not going to be Sami and Inuit. You know, they do have their own sort of groups, and they will be represented at COP, but they will be in side meetings. They're not going to be part of the actual climate discussions. They're not invited to those tables. So
yeah, that's it. Thank you so much, Susana. We have 2 minutes. Thank you so much for allowing us to hear your presentation, to everything that you're doing for the voice and vote that we need in the legislation of environmental law and environmental policies for everybody, for the common benefit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated speaking with you again.
Muchas gracias por seguirnos en la transmisión. No se vayan, tenemos más para ustedes.
Muchas gracias.